This is the Angry Birds Bird Minute, sponsored by Angry Birds for their 15th anniversary, where we tell you all about a cool bird that may or may not be angry. Today's bird is the potu. Potus are a group of nocturnal birds with flip-top heads and enormous yellow eyes. When their eyes and mouths are shut, these birds are so well camouflaged that you could be forgiven for thinking they were just a branch or a stump. To help them maintain awareness without breaking camouflage, they have little wrinkles in their eyelids which allow them to peek at their surroundings without truly opening their eyes. But when they do open them, instant Muppet. It's the silliest face in the animal kingdom. They are truly hilarious looking. But are they angry? On a scale of 1 to angry, we rate the potu as bugging out. This is Wild Green Streams. I'm Rhett. And today on the show, we have returning Jayden Engert, who is a researcher. He was with Global Roadmap at the James Cook University when we last spoke. The group helped contribute to his research into road construction throughout, the research is into road construction throughout the tropics, but the specific project and the specific area we helped with was mapping out roads that had been constructed unofficially across Borneo, with an interest in understanding the patterns that they're getting built in, being able to maybe predict where they're going to be built next and inform conservation decisions, because when it comes to tropical deforestation, tropical economics, and tropical ecology, a whole lot of that comes down to where the roads are. So Jayden, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Red, thanks for having me. It's great to be back. Great introduction.
Thanks. Do you mind just explaining a little bit more, as the person who's the total expert on it, what the project was and what the results were?
So the project that was contributed to by Wild Green Memes with like the Wild Green Mapathon was looking at sort of the amount of roads across the tropics that are not considered in existing data sets like OpenStreetMap or government data sets, and trying to see how these roads affect our understanding of like what drives deforestation, where deforestation happens, and these sorts of things, because this information is very important for conservation planning, conservation science in general. And so roads are like one of the key sort of proximate drivers of deforestation. They sort of determine where it happens, not necessarily like the reason people do deforestation, but they control what areas can be deforested. So by identifying sort of all these unmapped roads, we also identify areas where deforestation can be happening or could happen in the future that we might not know about. So people who are doing conservation planning based on the official data or sort of OpenStreetMap might underestimate the risk to conservation in these sorts of areas. And I think from memory, we found a few 100,000 kilometers of unmapped road across the area. Yeah, I should have pulled up the numbers exactly, but yeah. And the amount of road, like the percentage of roads that were unmapped varies across the region depending on sort of like the quality of the existing data. In a lot of areas, it was like 50% of the roads are mapped, but in some areas, only about like 3 to 10% of the roads are mapped, which means that like the risk of deforestation is what, like 10 to 30 times higher than what people might be expecting if they're using this freely available data.
We should say that because it's been a few years now, the way that the mapping took place is that various people, either people working with you directly or volunteers from the internet or from Wild Green Memes, they were given photos of basically from Google Earth of like recent photos of the areas of interest, and they literally just traced on their screen where the roads were. So it was an issue of basically taking these photos and this data that already existed and was already public and making it useful in a way that conservationists and policymakers could see what was going on the ground, because it was too much for one person to just look at and understand.
Yeah, that's a great summary. All this information is in the like satellite imagery that you can access through Google Earth, but yeah, actually translating that into data that can be used in assessments is like a whole other thing. And now there are like lots of different groups working on ways to do that automatically through like machine learning and AI algorithms and stuff like that, which just like were not available or not accurate when we started the project. So we got to all sit down for hours on end and trace the roads manually.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how quickly I feel like AI is one of those things, as you know, this is a very broad term, but where it has a bad rap for good reasons, but also in specific applications, it's giving us these crazy abilities. Like I know people who are using it to identify bird songs, and not just the type of bird, but what the birds are saying. They're learning like literally if the birds make this call, maybe it means that they're only finding this kind of fruit right now. So we could put listening devices out in forests and suddenly we know all this stuff about the current status of that forest that we could never, it would have taken an immense amount of work to figure out before. But it's really exciting to see these crowdsourcing projects sometimes generating data sets that can be used for conservation later.
Yeah, so the data set that was generated through the help of Wild Green Memes has been used for, so the Nature paper that came out I think at the start of this year, 2024, and also I think another 3 or 4 papers that are like in the works at the moment that have also used that same data set. And I've also been contacted by some people who are doing the AI mapping stuff to try and use this data to train their algorithms. So it has, a massive sort of scope of use.
Who's making the roads? Is it mostly kind of small people in the area, or is it big corporations or even governments that aren't reporting it?
It's very complex and it differs a lot from region to region. There's heaps of roads that are legal or official that are not included in these data sets. And that can be just because governments don't have the resources to continually map the roads, or there may be some types of roads that are not considered in like official road estimates, such as like logging roads or roads within palm oil plantations and things like that, may not technically be considered roads by a government. But for the sake of conservation and things like this, they are still like very important roads. But there is also a percentage that are constructed illegally or unofficially, either without any sort of government regulation, which I think is probably a fairly small percentage of the case. But again, like that would vary across different countries, different areas. But there's also heaps of roads that are constructed technically legally, but not officially. So again, like heaps of logging tracks and things like this. Companies are often allowed to construct the logging roads, but the government doesn't register them. So they're technically legal, but they're just, no one is bothering to sort of register them in the official data.
Do we know if maybe, from this paper would be great, but just in general from the Global Roadmap Project, do we know how that has informed any kind of conservation policy or any actions on the ground?
At the moment, the work from this paper hasn't specifically, because it's kind of like a broad picture assessment and like critique of the existing data, which will hopefully, and I guess it has in part sort of inspired more efforts to map these roads in these areas. But in terms of like on the ground action at the moment, I can't say that it has done anything, at least that I know of. But hopefully the things that I have been working on that should be coming out soon will lead more into sort of tangible on the ground work.
Sure. What are you working on now?
My thesis work, which I have just finished and I'm sort of like in the process of publishing now, is to build these models to predict where these sort of unofficial or illegal secondary roads will be built off new sort of highways and stuff that gets constructed into intact habitat areas. Across a lot of tropical forest regions, there are proposed new highways and development corridors to connect different cities, cities to ports and things like this. And the idea is that the models that I'm building will be able to sort of estimate the potential impacts of these projects and where the impacts are likely to be. And then that can sort of translate to on-the-ground action where people can prioritize where to invest efforts to minimize the impacts.
That is so important. It's one of those things that, to me, I guess it makes sense that we recently got the technology, as in like Google Earth in the last 20 years and all that. But it's one of those things where it's crazy that it hadn't already been done.
Yeah, so these kind of estimates have been done before in a simplistic way because of the limitations of like the available data. So people would say like any sort of, if we're going to build this highway, anything within 1 kilometer, 10 kilometers, 50 kilometers is potentially going to be impacted. But like deforestation and road building are very uneven in space. So if you think about like the landscape characteristics that influence things like deforestation and road building, people don't usually build a road straight up the side of a cliff or through the middle of a swamp. So if we can add that sort of extra information into the model, we can build sort of more spatially refined models of where the impacts will occur. And then at least the idea is we won't sort of waste conservation efforts or conservation funds in areas where it's not likely to get impacted anyway. And we can sort of focus on the areas that are actually likely to be at risk.
Well, Jayden, thanks so much for doing all this great work. And it's really lovely that the Wild Green community got to be a little part of it. Usually this is the part where I ask if someone has something they want to plug. So do you have anything that you'd like people to go read, or maybe you have your own podcast or something, but just anything to promote at all?
I don't know, honestly. I would plug the papers, but they're not out yet. So I guess
Okay.
once I get that out, I'll be writing some popular science accompaniments as well, and I can plug those when we get there.
Well, until then, this paper is called Ghost Roads and Destruction of Asia-Pacific Tropical Forests. It was published in Nature, and you should go check out the acknowledgements section because it includes Wild Green memes. Thanks so much for doing this and for coming on the show, man.
Thanks for having me again.
Well, that's our show. Thanks for listening. You can support the show and get cool merch in the mail on our Patreon at patreon.com/wildgreenmemes. That's memes with an M. Until next time, I'm Rhett.
And I'm Jayden.
And happy Year of the Raccoon.